Going once, going twice.
I'm going to
Sold.
go into questions here in just a minute, right after the live review.
Yeah.
All right, so let's do this here. Yeah, because I noticed we do have lots of great questions here. You know, we've been reading over those, so we're going to go over those here in just a minute. All right, let's do this. Let's go take a look at an auction that's happening here. And the sale we're going to go and look at here is actually in it's actually not Onondaga County is what it is here. We're going to pull it up. And this is the Syracuse, New York area is where Onondaga is at. And in fact, here, let me just go up here and we'll pull up the entire cell here. So we see all the items that we have. So there's 149 items. It's a pretty good, it's a pretty good size sale. And if we're looking at it, let me give everybody an idea here of where, there we go, Onondaga County here. And here it is in New York. So in fact, yeah, a lot of the areas here that we'll be looking at are all around this. There are lots of properties we see. So a lot of properties in the auction are going to be here in this area here, right around North Syracuse area, or in some of these upper towns right around here, like Clay and Cicero. At least, a lot of the properties that we're looking at here. And this is, yeah, you can get an idea here of where it's at and which part here of New York. Decent location though. It looks like, Onondaga has about 500,000 people. It's got a fairly high population here. But yeah, let's show you the properties because it's a good size sale. New York tends to have some pretty good opportunities with their tax sales. And granted, they have high taxes there, but I used to think New York's taxes were like the craziest, but really the more we look at a lot of states, there are lots of states that have high taxes. And the one thing that New York does offer that people seem to enjoy is they've got good government services there. They tend to have good programs. There's all of those property taxes tend to pay for a lot more things. So it is a nice area to live in, and there's pretty good deals on the properties there. It's a good area there to be able to buy and acquire property. So we've got a mix of properties here. We've got, in fact, let's see how these break down. You can see we've got 42 vacant properties here, vacant residential. We've got a few vacant commercial. We've got 46 single family homes. You'll see it there, and we have a few that are manufactured or multifamily.
Yeah, it looks like we've got some that are no category, which is probably something like farmland or recreational land or something like that.
Yeah, so really we could save ourselves time if we wanted just by focusing on specific types of properties we have here. There are a lot of really nice homes though in this sale, and I know there will be good deals that will come out of this sale because there are every year. There's good sales in this auction. But yeah, let's get an idea here of the properties we're looking at. So we have properties at quite a few different value ranges here. We've got properties that are down towards probably, I don't think we've got any tier 1 properties here. I'd have to look here a little bit closer. Let's pull up, I'll show you what we're talking about here. A lot of these are probably tier 2 and above. So here's this property is, they're putting the full market value at about 158. We can see it was built in 1935. It's about 1,140 square feet, 3-bedroom, 1 bath. We've got images of the property. In terms of its age, so this property actually looks like it's, the one thing that's nice about this is it looks like it's still occupied and, being used or lived in here. It's not overgrown really at all.
Yeah, in fact, last year we actually took a group of our students to this auction and, bidded on these different properties. In fact, there was some really good commercial land that we bidded on. We almost won some of it, but we just couldn't get enough research that we felt comfortable paying more than what our max bid would be. We very well could have lost out, but we just couldn't get enough information about all of this commercial land because it was several big pieces of commercial land. But there were some really good deals that came out of the auction.
Yeah, there's some nice neighborhoods in here with really nice properties. This is a great property. This is valued at $229, and again occupied as well here currently.
In fact, let's go ahead and grab that if we can.
And this is the village of North, so this is North Syracuse.
I'm just kind of interested what maybe some of the online market value tools like Zillow or Redfin might say it's valued at. And whenever we're looking at structured property, doing an online evaluation, we're going to be looking at things like the roof, the foundation, the outside structure as far as siding or brick. We're going to be looking, at any type of potential damage, the condition. It's really important that we do a good on-site evaluation because that's going to help us determine which properties we're actually going to go out and view. If we're not bidding there in person, then we're going to be sending somebody out there to view them. And we want to narrow that down to help save costs to the properties that make sense for us to go by or have somebody go by and view them.
Yeah, so it comes up on Zillow, it doesn't come up on Redfin for some reason. But they do have an estimate on it though of 260,000. So let's see, compared to that, what they were saying, 229. So it's a little bit higher there than what it's assessed at. But aside from that though, for it being built in 1965, it was remodeled or updated sometime in the last 10 years. Or at least I would guess sometime in the last 10 years, it could have been slightly more. But it's because those are definitely not the windows that came with the property in 1965. The roof is definitely not the same original roof that came with the property in 1965. The siding, looks to be newer or, was probably added sometime, after. There's a lot of things that we can see about the property that are updates. Now we do see window units in the, in the windows. So telling us we don't have an AC unit there on the property, at least not an AC unit there through forced air. But the other stuff we can see, and we have, we've got the utilities there hooked up on the front. Everything looks to be, it's a good property, and the condition of the property appears to be better than what the age would suggest, which is one of the things we're trying to determine with properties is, is like what kind of condition is it in? And if it's in anything like what it looks like right here, then it's in better condition than a 1965 property should be, unless it's been remodeled.
Yeah, in fact, pointing out those window units, I looked at those as well and thought, okay, this doesn't have central air, but it looks like a lot of it has been rehabbed. The roof looks great. Shade said the windows look great. The siding looks great. The yard looks clean. This would be a great property that we'd be willing to pay a little bit higher, maybe get up into, 35, 40% of the property's value, especially if we do the comparison because the condition looks great. So even though it's older, because we can see the outside has been updated, it's not a guarantee, but it at least gives us an idea that they probably updated the inside as well. Usually if people are spending a bunch of money on the outside, they've spent some money on the inside. Now that's not always going to be the case, but it is, it is the case most of the time. Look at this kind of property here. This one looks like it's been vacant for a while. In fact, one thing I notice automatically in looking at, looks like there's something pasted there on the front door. That's automatically at least going to be a bit of a warning sign that could be, it's not necessarily, but it could be something like a letter from the city essentially saying, hey, you need to do this, you need to, it's a possible demolition letter or a letter saying that the property's been condemned. So that's automatically going to be something we're going to look at if we were to have somebody go do an on-site evaluation, zoom in and get a photo of that so we can see exactly what that says. Plus, we're going to give the city a call to find out what issues may be on this property from them as well.
Yeah, we can see the property was built in 1938, and obviously the issue here is it's the age of the property, but it's really more about the condition of the improvements. Is because as we've seen, you can have properties that are fairly old but can still be in good shape. This property, like Steve was saying, it looks like it's been sitting vacant for a while. It would not surprise me at all to find out that, let's say, the owner of this property passed away or something and didn't have any family, or that find out this property's been sitting vacant for 3 years. I could believe that. These are the properties we've got to watch out for because again, the longer they've been sitting vacant, the more time you have for things to go wrong, the more things, more issues potentially come up. And, with this property here, in fact, just based on what we can see there, I wouldn't bid any percentage amount on the property, just because it is going to need a fair amount of work. and it may be possible, to be able to do some kind of a deal, but it's somewhat value limited in that, they estimate the value at 83,000 on the property, currently. Now, could it be worth more if it was all fixed up? Maybe. But it's not like it's a $250,000 property there where you could put 100,000 into it and fix it up. It doesn't have that much value for fixing up. And so, and obviously it needs stuff like, I mean, you can tell just a roof alone, just by looking at the roof, looks like it's garbage. And the issue with that is it probably means we've got water leaking inside as well.
Yeah, I was going to point out the same thing right before you said that. That roof looks in rough shape. You can see even the roof over the garage over on the end looks pretty rough. The whole thing looks rough. And so, like Shade said, this is a property we're just going to pass on. Yeah, just based on the condition. It's not something that we want to really get involved in. Now, that next property down, that split level or 2-story, that would be a great property to go after. Again, looking at it, it looks like it has been rehabbed or things have been done since it was originally built in 1964. That's obviously newer siding, at least not original siding. We can see that, the windows look like they've been upgraded. Overall, it looks like a pretty clean property that would be worth paying money for because of the condition.
Yeah, it's in great shape. Now, here's an interesting one here right below this. And this one is also one that's been sitting vacant here for a time now. Built in 1961, 1,600 square feet. And this is a property that's been sitting here vacant for probably quite some time now. They've got the value. This one has value that is high enough where it could justify some fixing up. It's 233,000. If we're looking at it, so let's say the property's been sitting here vacant for 2 years, maybe 3. It's hard to tell from what we're looking at out here on the outside. But what's nice about this stuff is that the landscaping stuff we can take care of relatively easy. What we're concerned about is on the inside of the property. And if we were going to buy this property, we'd want to make sure that we picked it up at a low enough percentage of value that it would give us room, to do some of the rehab and repairs on it. Because most likely they're going to be needed, on a property like this. So this is a property where we might bid this up to, we might limit our bidding and maybe top off at 25% or 30% and not go as high as maybe other bidders would go to a higher percentage in order to try to win this property, but we'd keep it lower just because we're trying to leave more room for potential repairs and things that might be needed. But this property still has potential to work. I don't think it's lost completely here. It looks like a few years ago it was probably just a regular property like every other one on the block.
Yeah, in fact, I completely agree. We could, even though it does look like, it has been sitting vacant, there are some red flags on it. There's also things that make me think that, hey, the property is savable and could be very profitable. Even looking at the roof there, we can see that there's a bunch of plants growing, but those plants are growing in the gutter. Overall, the roof looks like, at least from what we can see at this angle, looks like it's pretty good over the garage. The windows seem to be shut. And so even though it does look like it needs to be cleaned, we need to take a weed whacker to it. We can see here that the windows seem to be shut. That's always something that we're looking for, because if it's vacant and the windows open, we don't know who's been in the property. We've seen that happen a lot of times. So even though, there are signs and some risk that it's sat vacant, there's also a lot of good things about the property, and it looks like it was pretty structurally sound. In fact, we may go ahead and look this type of property up on Google or Zillow, because if it was listed for sale, we might be able to see when the property sold for and what the condition was at that time. Many times we've looked up property and we can see, okay, look here are a bunch of interior photos of the property. Now, granted, these were posted 5 years ago when it sold last, but at least it helps us give an idea of the condition at that time, what the interior looks like, or any additional information they may provided when they originally sold the property.
Yeah, what's also interesting about this property is that if you were to acquire it, you could easily spend $500,000, maybe even more, just getting it, the outside of it cleared up, cleaned up, getting things cut down, and trying to make it look livable again. But just that step alone would probably make a humongous difference in the curb appeal of this property. I mean, because it would instantly change it from looking like it's been vacant for years to looking like a normal house. And that's all you would probably have to do in order to make this deal work. is just shake off the vacant, the vacancy that's had here for a while and start making it usable again. And you could definitely have this property sold here pretty quickly. Very interesting property. And there's a lot of interesting properties in the sale. I mean, you can see just by looking at them, we've got nice homes, that are built throughout a variety of time frames here. And then there's also rough properties, that you would probably want to avoid altogether. There's everything in between here. But the nice properties are nicer than average. You're going to have a hard time in most states finding tax sale properties that are this good.
Yeah, definitely quite a few good properties. We saw the same thing last year as well. There's also an opportunity that we teach in one of our profiles where you can contact these property owners before the auction has taken place and try to buy the property before the sale. There's a pretty good strategy in using that method. In fact, let's take a look and see if there's any good land that we might want to look at or anything else.
Well, let's see. Oh, I wonder, should I look at the no category or should I look at the vacant residential?
Let's try the no category just to see what they placed underneath the no category.
So
The first look like junk lots, so we can avoid these. We automatically even see from the photo it looks landlocked. In fact, that second one, that one there very well could be, or the number 32. That very well could be an easement property. We're gonna have to look a little bit more into it, but I see those big power lines, and that's a little bit of a red flag. We want to check and see, it's big enough that it's probably not.
Yeah, so it's listed as 5 acres here, but what we can see though is you can see how that
that's some type of utility thing.
Yeah, I mean, you think you were right in the first time, and this probably is a somewhat useless property. It is 5 full acres, and so there's parts of it that are usable, but a good chunk of the property that you would want to use is being used by easement. So you could probably maybe use the same road here going in, potentially. Maybe you could use something down here with it. So maybe it has some use, but about half of its area is being used up roughly by probably by this easement here for this power station.
Yeah, exactly. That's something you've always got to look at because those easements, they're there and they're going to stay there. In fact, I remember this wasn't actually one of our students, but it was somebody who contacted us. They had went to a seminar, learned about tax sale investing, and then just went out there and started buying property. And they ended up buying a property that had cell towers on it, and it was an easement property like that. And once they had purchased it, they found out that they can't rent out or that they can't make money off the cell phone companies and the providers. They thought, hey, they're going to have to pay us rent. We're going to make a ton of money. And as soon as they figured that out, then they started calling everyone they could find that was involved in tax sale training, trying to help them, with the situation. And they ended up calling us. We answered the phone for them. And and looked over the deal. They actually bought this property, and then they bought another property with a home that they didn't do an on-site evaluation, and it had been burnt down. And so, in looking at the deals with them, there wasn't a lot that we could do. We can't help somebody if they've already made that type of mistake. I mean, we gave them strategies on the best thing that they could do with those, and they didn't take those suggestions either. But either way, it put them in a position where they lost, I think, $50,000-$60,000 on those two deals, and essentially had two worthless properties.
And look at how much value that they're assigning, the property. They're putting it, that 5 acres valued at $602,000. That just seems crazy. They must be assigning a certain amount of value there for this cell tower, and taxing you for it, I suppose. I don't know. At least I don't know how else they get to $602,000 for this property.
No, it's not on the beach in Miami or something. I don't know why either.
Yeah, that is weird. That one's a weird one there. All right, let's
But
see.
either way, they're not going to be able to use that property where that cell tower is located.
Yeah, you would want to avoid that property because it would be nothing but problems for you. Is that landlocked here? It's 10 acres.
Yeah, it looks like there's maybe a paper road to it. It also looks like it could be a little bit swampy.
Yeah, well, they've got a really low assessed value there of, $4,800 there for 10 acres. And so it probably does have something like that wrong with it. Oh, now they also have these ones in maybe that, I don't know if this one is commercial.
Yeah, I think so.
Single-use building, 1,400 square feet, valued at 100,000. They're saying.
With any time we see a commercial property, that's where we're going to look up the address. We're going to see if there used to be a company there, look up the company. You know, a lot of times we can find out a lot of information. For example, let's say that we find a property that used to be a restaurant. We can look up online, see when that restaurant was in business, when it went out of business. Many times get photos of those property because people have been there or taken photos there, done something, and at least give us a better idea of what we're buying and what it was as of a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I can see that it's wildflower Nelson spot next to it, which I think we can see that's probably the building there to the right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's some kind of cleaners.
No, it was. Now, the fact that it was a cleaners, you know, let's say it was a dry cleaning business, we're going to do one other step with this property. We're going to check up the address on it, the EPA website, because, you know, the fact that it's an industrial property, you know, it probably doesn't have any type of EPA action on it, but it's worth checking out. It looks like it was called Jack's Cleaners, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, it was Jack's Cleaners. Look at that.
Oh,
Environmental easement package. What is this? Jack's Dry Cleaners. Yeah, this is exactly why you gotta watch out for stuff like this.
requires an environmental easement. At least you have who you could contact about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we were to bid on this property, you know, this is something we need to look into and find out more about it. Because let's say that there's, you know, some type of big fine on it, and you purchase the property thinking you're getting a great deal, just to find out that there's a $60,000 fine or lien that's been placed on it for some type of environmental issue.
Yeah, it's definitely something you would want to watch out for. And dry cleaning businesses are, one of those things specifically that seem like they oftentimes are at issue with EPA. That one looks like something. Oh, that one's more. You know what it is that one is also
Easement.
more easement. Yeah, it's more easement property, abandoned agricultural land. So they're calling it there, but it's got two big towers on it, 2.7 acres. No, they valued it at 12,000 there, which that could fool you if you weren't careful.
It looks like they placed at least some of the junk in the commercial properties in here. You know, it looks landlocked. You know, that one, want the address, the next one down, that one maybe it's not landlocked.
Oh, it's 0.13. It's just tiny.
Yeah.
Oh,
Look at that
there's
value.
some kind of small building on it.
Yeah, that makes you worry when you can't even see it.
Yeah, I mean, if there is a building there, it's buried. It looks like. Is it one of those buildings?
You'd think if it was, they would have took some photos of it. I think it's behind.
Oh, it probably.
See that blue?
I wonder if it's back there. You think?
I don't know. It might not be. That's where we check the GIS map to get an idea of exactly where the lot sits.
Yeah. Yeah, they do seem like they have a lot of their junk in the miscellaneous here. Some of the lots are bigger. This one's also probably, though, it looks swampy. $2,000 value is probably a good chunk of that reason why. Yeah, I think I'd probably avoid most of this stuff. It's in the miscellaneous anyway, or that's not classified here specifically. Now the vacant raw land, let's see, residential vacant, maybe it's not, maybe it's a little bit better.
These ones with the photos, some of those could be buildable lots. But again, before we buy any of the properties, this one's 166 feet by 200 feet, has a value of $40,000. So this very well could be a buildable lot because they're showing both value, it's showing some type of size, but that doesn't mean that it's a guarantee to be a buildable lot. That's where we've got to check into the zoning. We've got to do our research on it and make sure that it is by looking at the zoning code, looking at the zoning map. Otherwise, we could be buying a property that we think has high value, but really limits that value by the fact that it can't be built on.
Yeah, it's definitely not like any standardized size lots there either. They're all different sizes. Now let's see if any of these other pieces of land. Two acres at 22,000. All right, that's not too bad. That one looks like a leftover. Yeah, okay. Here's a retention ditch. And a good example of property you would just want to avoid. From looking at it overhead, it's clear that it's not usable. It's not shaped like the other lots. But even if it was big enough that somebody could put something on, the issue you would run into is with the easements. I think you're going to find it's low ground all the way down. Probably all the way down to the water here. I don't know if you've got some kind of ditch or something here on the other side of it. The shape is part of the issue, but the water kind of tells us the story here on this.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree.
Now there are some that where you're not sure if they're leftovers or if they are something in between. Now that actually, sometimes properties like this have potential.
The one thing I would need to check, or we'd need to check.
Landlocked, yeah.
Yeah, if it has a roadway easement, see how there's a road going out near the property? If there's a roadway easement that we can drive through their property to access this property, then this really could be a decent piece of land to look at. Does have minimal value based on the size, but if it does have an easement, then it's at least worth looking at. But if it doesn't have an easement and we can't drive through this road to get to this property, then it would be a property that we would completely avoid. That's the reason research is so important. You just can't look at something and expect that it's going to be workable or usable. We've got to research into it.
Yeah, these lots, let's see how they're valued. See, each one of these lots is valued at 20,000. Even these are saying they don't have road frontage. Are they on paper roads? That must
Yeah.
be on a paper road.
What we mean by paper road is essentially there's a road that's been planned, as we can see there on the map, but the road hasn't been built. So most of the time we're going to avoid paper roads unless we can see that they may be expanding the road or it's very, very close to the road, or we could get it for a real, real cheap price, like pennies on the dollar, a couple of percentages value. Otherwise, we'd avoid that kind of property.
Yeah, in fact, yeah, a lot of these here would be worth just avoiding, or at least are not the kinds of properties we would usually go after. They're leftover pieces. These are kind of leftover chunks of land.
Yeah, there's a reason why some of those properties that we see are landlocked are in the tax sale to begin with.
Yeah.
Before we finish up, do you happen to have that link around for the auction where we saw properties sell for $1?
Yes, I think I do.
We won't spend a lot of time on this. We actually created a YouTube video that's going to be premiering this afternoon in about 45 minutes. So if you're interested, go ahead and check out our YouTube channel and we'll go over more detail.
Oh, we also need to get to the questions here.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and finish up the questions and then.
Yeah, let's see here. Oh yeah, I do have this up here.
We don't need to spend a lot of time. I just think it'd be interesting to kind of look at it quick. If it's too hard to find, don't worry about it.
No, I've got it right here.
But this is by far some of the cheapest property that we've seen sell in a tax sale auction. As little as $1.
Yeah, they've actually got quite a bit of properties, and also a lot of properties that sold for a single bid, or only had one bid on them. So we have properties. Let's show you. There are a lot of these that sold for $1, and some of the properties that sold for above that are actually, were not bad. I mean, properties like this one that sold for 2,900, is not a bad little house here. Let me get a bigger image of that. But we can also grab the parcel number and we can pull up information on any of these if we want. But that's a pretty nice, property there for $2,900. And then we see properties that sold for $1 or didn't even get bids in some cases here. Let's see. So here's property didn't get bids. No bid. This one sold for $3,400. This one, no bids on this one. This one did get a bid. So this one sold for $500. Got a single bid there for $500 and sold at that. This house here sold for $3,400. Not very much. Tiny little amounts here. $1,500 on that commercial property there.
Yeah, look at that commercial one. I'll see if they have a little bit bigger photo. I almost think that is either a commercial or a duplex.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are quite a few of these. Let's see.
Yeah, there was some lots in here that sold for $1 that had an assessed value of 20 grand. Nice big lots. And there's a few that ended up selling for higher prices, 2 or 3 grand. But, so there were some pretty good properties that sold in this particular sale.
Yeah, in fact, let's see here. What I was looking at there, it actually got a bid.
You looking for that larger lot?
Yeah, I was wondering which one that one was.
I think it was. I think it's either that fountain one or the one above it. No, it wasn't that fountain one because that one sold for 200. But pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, these are crazy deals here on a lot of these properties that sold for such low prices. And yeah, a lot of these properties are also pretty desirable. Are good usable properties. Yeah, I mean, and so many of these just didn't get bids. Didn't have any bids at all.
Yeah, we actually found some usable properties on this list that didn't even have any bids, like Shade said. So we'll actually go through this more in our YouTube video. We'll kind of go through, look up the records, look up some of the assessed values, things like that.
Yeah. We can go through and pull up parcel numbers here with each one of them. Now let me go through and also hit up some of the questions that we've had, because we've had a lot of really great questions and I don't want to miss these. Okay. All right, now, see, the first question here is, I'm figuring out where to start here with this one. Okay, since construction costs have gone high, I'm now thinking about focusing on houses as opposed to buying vacant lots. I'm not sure if folks are motivated to construct on vacant lots, but since I haven't found success with auctions, should I focus on over-the-counter deals? Okay, so one of the things we should probably talk about, this is actually, I'm glad this question gets asked here, because over-the-counter opportunities, they were really, they were something that happened, or they were there because of the auction systems that were being used, and because of the lack of investors that could actually attend or be there in person. I mean, really, for the most part, a lot of the over-the-counter stuff, what we're dealing with is just the counties struggle to try to bring investors or get investors to come out to the sale back before they were doing anything online. The issue is that since counties have started moving to online auctions, it's become so much easier to buy that counties aren't really having any over-the-counter inventory anymore. If they do have over-the-counter inventory, it's the stuff that's left over that you don't want to mess with. It's the stuff that, if they sold pretty much everything they have that isn't any good, then what they have left is not really worth going after. It's not really worth having, and that's the concern, or that's the risk. It's owning the property, that you don't want.
Yeah, and there's still opportunity with over-the-counter, in some states, Pennsylvania, with even Arkansas, they do their over-the-counter differently now, where they re-auction them in an online auction. But as far as the question of buying land, as long as we can get it for cheap enough, even though construction costs have come up, we still are having a lot of success with it. Our students are having a lot of success with it. But it's all about picking it up for the cheap enough price and then being able to resell that, for some type of profit margin. But, there's only so much land available. And so if we can get it for cheap enough, it's still going to be a good value. Another thing that has happened is that some of the over-the-counter lists have turned into land banks. And so that's another area where there is a buying opportunity to buy both land, to buy, homes, structured property is through some of these government land banks. In fact, if you are a member, you can go down to our land bank section and look at all of the different land banks available. And that's really one of the better avenues as well to find over-the-counter properties is through these land banks.
Yeah, in fact, the question went on a little bit more here. It was asking, I said, I've looked at several repository lists in Pennsylvania, but any other states? Several others have land banks, so it doesn't make sense. I just attended a forfeited land auction in Ohio, but no success. Ohio Cleveland a good option? They have recurring auctions, but those are foreclosure mortgage auctions. Okay, so the one thing I would first say here is the one thing that you can take advantage of today better than ever before, and you couldn't have done maybe even 15 years ago, is participate in more sales that are online, sales that you don't have to go to in person. Quite frankly, between if we're talking about different kinds of foreclosure sales that are happening, yeah, every county that holds tax sales also has their bank foreclosure sales, that they have. And those have the potential as well to be good deals. I mean, at least any properties that that are being sold for less than what's owed. But the issue there is that it's not a true foreclosure in that the bank is going to sell it to you, and the lender basically, the person that borrowed the money may have defaulted, but it's still the bank's ownership, and they still are going to determine and dictate how much they're willing to sell it to you for. You might be able to get a discount a little bit, but they're not going to let you just buy it at a low percentage of value there because it's in a mortgage sale. Like I said, there can be good deals in some of those mortgage sales though. But no, the one thing you can do today though is you can participate in more auctions. And so if you don't have success in a certain area, first off, if it's an online auction, it's a good area for you to kind of go back and to participate in again when they hold another sale. But part of what I think you want to do though is participate in more auctions, give yourself more chances to squeeze the trigger and to bid on properties, so you can give yourself a chance to win. At least, it sounds like you've tried quite a bit and you've had, you haven't had success yet. And in some ways, that's actually, I'm sure that it's disappointing for you, but I'm glad that you haven't won properties at high prices. The fact that you've been participating and you haven't won yet, at least tells me that you've got, that you're sticking to your guns, because that's kind of the way it's supposed to work if you're doing it right. If you're doing it wrong, then you could probably acquire lots. But if you're doing it right, you're going to lose a lot of properties. But the point though is that when you do finally win properties, you're going to win them at good rates and they'll be profitable. And then you can kind of establish areas you can go back to. It sounds like you're right on the edge of breaking through. It's just a matter of landing that first deal with one of these auctions. And if you participate enough, that's bound to happen. Especially if you're bidding on enough properties, you're going to win eventually.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even just like that auction that we were looking at just a second ago, with properties selling for as little as $1. That was an auction that we had listed on our auction calendar. And sometimes some of these small auctions can be good opportunities where, something like Bid for Assets have been around for 15 or 20 years, have been doing tax sales for that same amount of time. People understand and will go there for looking at lists. What we try to do with our membership program and our list service is look for all of these other areas as well, that maybe they're a law firm that just handles one county and they do it one time a year, but because they're not blasted and everyone doesn't know about them, there's going to be less competition, which means that we're going to get better opportunity. And so, I agree with Shade. I think just keep up the good work. The one thing that we do need to look at as far as Cleveland is concerned is there can be water bills that attach to the property. So whenever we're looking at Cleveland real estate, we're going to be sure to do our due diligence and check in to see if there's any type of water liens, because some of them have been outrageous in the past where people haven't paid for 5 or 10 years and they've got this huge water lien on it. So that would be one thing that we would look at.
Yeah. Let's see. Another question here is, what is the best way when living far from a property that you've won to make the property alluring, such as, the assessment, local ordinances, zoning, etc., to sell to an investor, and best places to advertise? That's a couple of great questions there. So I guess the first thing that we do with the property in the area, is we try to pick an area where we know properties are moving. So we try to check for that when we're looking into the market, and we see about how many properties are selling and about where our price point is at with our property compared to other properties in the area. But what we do to make it appealing, so there's certain things that we can do with the property to make it appealing. And a lot of it depends on how much we've invested into it, because if we're not into it very deep, then we're probably not going to do anything to the property there on site, at least unless we have to. Unless we have to do something. So if it's land, we may not do anything there with it. A lot of times we don't unless we need to. If it's a home, then that's different. We need to improve. Basically, we need to make it alluring to buyers, and that's where we're going to do a lot of work, like try to get the landscaping cut down, try to get the property looking more presentable, for curb appeal, essentially. But a lot of it, though, when it comes down to selling, we try to include a lot of this information about the property here in our listing. So if it's a usable property, then we try to include information that explains exactly why it's usable. That it meets this requirement, it meets that requirement. We try to include more information rather than less to allure or to draw in our buyers. We also use, I guess, additional information or post on additional places. There's probably a lot of different ways that you can try to sell. Also, I guess, depending on how much traffic we get in the area, and how big of an area it is. But there's so many different online sources now where we can post properties, to look for things like investors. And so the nice thing is you can pretty well create one listing that you can post and repost over and over again. And so, getting it on more services is obviously a big factor, but there's so many services today that are new or just starting, they're branching out. There's so many ways you can get it in front of more people than you could have, let's say, 10 years ago. So I don't know if you would even necessarily have to have it on too many services here before you're going to get some attention on it. If you've got it priced aggressively, a lot of times you'll get attention on the property before you even. I mean, we get attention on some properties right after we buy, before we even have the properties listed. Just because individuals are interested in the property, will look up and see who owns it and contact us. We have that happen all the time, and so. I guess there's all different factors. I wish there was an easy one-shot thing there, but it's the whole package together that makes the property attractive. And so all those things together tend to work out best for us getting more eyes on the property and getting it sold. The other thing is if property's slow and it's not moving, changing up how we're selling it, like offering up things like something like seller financing, or changing up the pricing on it. These are all things you can do to help get a property that's stagnant to move.
Yeah, and Shade actually brings up a real good point as far as writing our ads. When we're writing our ads for sell listings, we try to include information to help educate the buyer. So if it is a tax deed property, and let's say that we're wholesaling it, meaning we're selling it as is, then we may we purchased this property through a tax foreclosure auction or a judicial foreclosure auction. You will receive a quit claim deed, or using that kind of terminology. In fact, we have actual forms examples that we have in our form center on the website. But at least then when somebody gives you a call, they are looking at it, they understand why it's a discount. It doesn't automatically look like a scam. So if there's a bunch of building lots and the cheap ones for $10,000 for sell locally, and you have yours listed at $5,000, well, they're going to think, well, why is this one so much cheaper? We're telling them why it's so much cheaper right there in the listing to a degree. Hey, I picked up this property, I'm selling it, moving it on. There's we're selling it for a discount, and this is the reason why we're selling it at the discount. Also posting it on Zillow, obviously, that's going to help attract buyers. Placing it on Facebook Marketplace is another great tool to be able to offer your property. And then, of course, even Craigslist. All three of those are going to target a different type of individual that's looking at property, which gives ourselves a better chance of being able to sell the property because it's going in front of different types of people.
Yeah, I think all those are pretty good ideas here for places that you can list the property. It's amazing though. We actually sell a lot of properties too through neighbor letters, and sometimes we'll send out more than one round of neighbor letters. So, if we've got a property and we send out neighbor letters, which that's usually the very first thing we do, just because a lot of times it's effective, and we'll find buyers through the neighbor letters. But if we send them out and we haven't heard anything for 3 months, we'll send out another round of neighbor letters. Maybe just to let them know that we're changing up something, or we're going to offer seller financing, or we're going to do something to make it more attractive. The other thing is, if we list properties at like 50% of what they're estimated to be worth, we tend to attract investors anyway. So a lot of our ability to attract investors kind of depends on how we have the property priced out. And if we have it priced out, way under market value, it tends to be investors that are usually interested anyway. And so if we price it closer to market, then I think we're usually looking for more of like we're going to deal with more with buyers, more like retail buyers, than we will necessarily investors. At least that's been our experience with our pricing.
Yeah, and also when you do talk to somebody, it's important to educate them. Even tell them in a matter of a minute or two how you picked up the property, that it's gone through a tax foreclosure that eliminates mortgages, judgments. You've researched the property, there aren't any liens, or if there are liens, you paid those liens off, and essentially they're getting a clear property. At that point, they can either decide to go through quiet title, pay the cost, and go through the quiet title process so they get a warranty deed, or they can just own the property. And after owning it for a certain period of time, depending on the state, you can get a warranty deed. For example, we purchased a property in Florida that we were using as a rental. And so instead of spending the money to go through quiet title at that point, we just went ahead and rented out the property for 4 years. And after 4 years, we could go ahead and get a warranty deed because we had been paying property taxes and owned that property for so long.
Yeah. All right, another question here. When looking at land in tax deed auctions, how do you assess land when it has an antenna on it, like the cell tower? It's a good question, because of the nature of tax sales, we're always looking at land and looking for potential risks or things that may make the property unusable. And that's just because we know that a higher percentage of the properties that are going into this are going to be junk. Because people don't want to pay property taxes, and junk land is generally the first thing that they're going to let go because it doesn't matter. And so we have to watch out for all of those properties. We basically have to weed out and sift through the junk in order to find the stuff that is good. And so one easy way is just, if there's ever any question about it, we just ignore the property, if we're not certain, but if it looks like there's things on the property, anything that is related to a utility like power, or if there's anything related, so any kind of power lines that we see, or any kind of a cell tower, or if there's things related to like the water, and you see, the water stuff there, it's all pretty well the same, in that all of it is going to stop us from being able to use the property from anything other than that purpose. And because of that, the properties usually don't have a lot of interest for us, and so we'll just ignore them. So usually a sign like that, if we see anything like that, like if there's a big antenna on it or something like that, I mean, unless it's like a very large piece of land, we're probably just going to ignore it.
Yeah, for example, that 5-acre parcel with that cell tower, the first thing we're going to do is what we talk about in stage 2 due diligence, is we're going to research the title and the deed. We're going to see exactly what that easement includes, what the restrictions are on the easement. And then from there, we're going to determine how much of that property is usable. So maybe only, half of the property is usable. Then we can get an idea of what real estate is selling for in that area. But we've also got to dock the price a little bit for the fact that there is an easement on the property, that there is a big cell tower right there, and somebody might want to build their home right next to that cell tower. So that property could still be usable. It could still have value, but we've got to discount the fact that there is an easement. There's easements that make a big deal, and there's easements that don't. In fact, some of you guys probably have an easement on your property and you don't even realize it. There could be a underground power line or water line or something like that that goes through your property, and it really doesn't affect anything. And that's the reason they put the signs out there that say, call before digging, is because there could be an easement. But an easement like that will affect the property value. Part of the property is going to be used for the easement. And then it's our job to see, is there anything left on that property that could be used for something other than what the easement is used for.